The town was small enough that you could learn its quiet by sound. If you walked the lane at dawn, you would hear the first boat's rope, the gull's slow complaints, someone's sweeping steps in front of a bakery. At night, you could hear the sea thinking itself into the rocks. It was a place measured by small loops. Day arrives, day leaves. People do their chores. They remember Myra grew up with the smell of yeast in her sleeves. Her father rose while it was still dark and came home when the lamps in the shop had dimmed. She learned to fold bread like folding a quiet hand. She learned how small routines could hold you steady. One evening in late summer, when the light stuck to everything like a soft promise, she walked the shorter way home and met the man by the cliff. He walked alone, a thin figure that seemed to match the slope of the land. He carried only one thing, a glass jar cupped in both hands. The jar glowed, but not like a lamp. It held a small, slow flame that shifted color like someone changing their mind about a word. Children had told stories about him. Adults had given him names that never stuck. To Mira, he looked like a person who had decided something and would not change it. She stopped when she came near, because there was a feeling around him like air that knows how to fold. He did not startle at her. He set the jar down on a flat stone and watched the horizon. "You're the baker's girl," he said, without turning. His voice was the kind that sits beside a sentence and lets it breathe. Myra blinked. "Everyone says that you keep the evenings." He laughed, but quiet. "They say what they must," he said. "Truth is quieter." He handed her the jar as if he expected her to refuse, so she did not. It was lighter than she imagined, warm where it touched her palms. "What is it?" she asked. The question was less curiosity than a small petition to keep the world sensible. "An evening," he said, "just a piece, small enough to fit between your fingers." He looked at her then, and his eyes had the tired clarity of someone who has learned to read the sea without a map. "You'll know when to open it." Mira turned it, watching the color inside settle like oil on water. She thought of her father coming home with flour on his hands, of nights when the light outside the bakery window looked like it might stay. She thought of forgetting the way names slide out of your mouth if you let them. The jar seemed to hold the shape of an ache she could not name. She could have left. She could have walked back to the oven, let the jars remain the town's odd rumor. Instead, she carried the jar home as if it were a loaf you must not drop at her window. The jar sat on the sill while the street below turned itself toward dusk. Children's voices fell away. Windows closed. The sea sent its slow message to the rocks. Mira made tea. She sat with her back to the warm glass and watched the jar breathe. The glow inside changed very gradually. It went from gold to thin lavender to something that might have been the blue. It made no sound the way houses do when they settle. It only made a softness in the room, a feeling that the hours were not quite the same as they'd been an hour ago. She slept. In sleep, the jar was a moon in miniature. She dreamed that she was on the shore and the sky opened like a hand. Someone, a woman with paint on her fingertips, stood beside her, and they did not speak, but passed a brush between them, painting the horizon the way people pass a necessary thing that belongs to both. When she woke, the jar had gone dim. The surface of the glass caught the weak morning light and held it in a way that made it look like something breathing, slow and deliberate. There was salt in the air, and the loaf that had been on the table was only partly eaten. She sat for a long while without moving. The dream lay in her like a small stone. That day, the town felt shifted by an unnoticeable degree. The baker's son, who fixed carts, hummed a tune he had not known he knew. A woman sweeping her door paused to look at the sky and smiled at nothing at all. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just the kind of tiny changes that seem to happen when someone else has been reminded to notice. Mira started going back. She brought him bread. She learned how he kept the jars. It was not magic, not as the market tells stories. It was patience and a kind of careful attention that seemed to do the work of time. He would go to the shoreline at a particular fold in the rocks where the waves sighed differently. He would open a jar, cup it to the sky, and wait. The light would slip in, not all at once, but like a thought, finding the right word. Then he would close the jar, tie it with a strip of worn cloth, and carry it home. Why? Mira asked once as they watched the horizon cool. To hold what forgets itself, he said. So the town has the weight of a day in a place that remembers. She thought about that at night. She could see how sometimes the small things needed a place to be kept. Because when no one paid attention, they simply thinned and faded. Names, songs, the way a finger rested on the rim of a cup, all the tiny shapes that make you, you. The jars did not stop forgetting. They only slowed it so that someone could breathe while pieces rearranged themselves. The man told her a name that night. Leora. He said it like a habit he had to maintain. He said that she painted the last evenings she could, that she gave him something to promise. She had a laugh that made him look at the sea differently, he said. She kept a notebook of colors and the things they were like. When she could no longer walk to the shore, he took the jar she asked for and kept it on a shelf. It glowed and hummed with the hush we call memory. Mira listened. Little by little, building an understanding that did not need explanation. She learned that some jars were ordinary evenings. The color of a boat's hull against a low sky. Some held a single voice caught between two words. Some contained the heat of a hand on a winter window. And once, when she opened a jar by accident, she saw a small boy running in a lane and smelled the bread he had just stolen. She closed the jar very quickly. "You must not open them unless you know why," the man said, but not sharply. He said it like a rule that was also a kindness. The sea kept its slow rhythm. The town kept its small commerce of sleep and bread and lamplight. The jars sat on shelves like quiet stars. Mira found herself thinking of the promise the man had given his jars, not to store everything, but to slow what was leaving so that people could find it again when they needed to. That sounded less like stopping time and more like respecting it. One night, as the sky smudged gold into purple and the gulls moved like tired notes, Mira walked to the cliff and stood where the man used to stand. She set her jar on the stone and watched the light. It was heavy in a good way. Somewhere between the waves and the town, she felt connected to something patient she did not know. Then, how far that patience would reach, nor how many small salvations it would require. She only knew she was awake to the shape of an evening, and that knowing felt like a new kind of song. The road into the valley narrowed until it was little more than a trail. Grass brushed against his shoes, wet from the mist that hung low over the ground. The smell of it, damp soil, faint pine, something almost metallic, filled his chest with a strange calm. Elias stopped often, not because he was tired, but because he couldn't shake the feeling that the land itself was watching him. Every time he paused, the sounds changed. A bird calling once, then going silent. A breeze rising, then vanishing like breath held in the throat. The map in his pocket was fading, the ink smudged from rain years ago. Only one thing was still clear, a small circle near the bottom that his mother had drawn in trembling pen. Inside it, she had written 3 words, "Where the heart stops." He'd never understood it, but the letter had said she was waiting there. So he kept walking. By the time he reached the heart of the valley, the fog had deepened. It clung to the trees like torn fabric, catching the fading light and turning everything into a kind of dream. The ground dipped into a wide clearing where a single stone well stood, old, covered in moss, ringed with scattered wildflowers. Elias slowed. Something about the well felt almost familiar, though he was sure he had never seen it before. He peered over the edge. The inside was dry. No water, only a hollow sound when he dropped a pebble and waited for the echo. But as the pebble struck bottom, he heard something else, a whisper. Not a word, exactly, more like the sigh of a voice trapped inside the stones. He leaned closer. For a moment, he thought he saw light moving far below the shimmer of water, or the reflection of something that wasn't there. When he blinked, it was gone. The path behind him had disappeared. Where the road had been, now only mist. No wind, no sound, just the slow ache of quiet pressing on his ears. He sat by the well for a while, unsure whether to go back or forward. Then he noticed footprints in the mud, not his. They were light, almost delicate, leading away from the well and into a cluster of birch trees at the far edge of the clearing. He followed. The trees opened into a small meadow, and there, tucked into the hill, stood a cottage. Its walls were gray stone, its roof half collapsed under moss. A thin trail of smoke rose from what looked like a chimney, twisting gently through the fog. He felt his pulse quicken. Someone was living here. He stepped closer. The door was open, just a crack. Warm air spilled out, carrying the scent of something faintly sweet, like burnt sugar and rain-soaked wood. He hesitated, then knocked. No answer. Only a soft, rhythmic sound from inside, like paper being turned. "Hello," he called quietly. The sound stopped. A moment later, a woman's voice answered, low and calm, like someone speaking from a memory. "You took long enough." He froze. The voice, it wasn't unfamiliar. Not exactly his mother's, but close enough to make his chest tighten. The door opened slowly, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. Inside the cottage stood a woman, tall, pale-skinned, with hair the color of early fog. She wasn't young, but she wasn't old either. And her eyes, they looked like the valley itself, still, heavy with rain. She studied him for a long time before speaking again. "You shouldn't have come back," she said softly. "The valley doesn't forget." He wanted to ask who she was or how she knew him, but his voice wouldn't come. All he could do was stand there, the air heavy between them, the mist curling through the doorway like something alive. She turned away and motioned him inside. "Come in before the fog closes," she said. "Once it seals, you won't find the door again." And though he didn't understand, Elias stepped across the threshold. The inside of the cottage was dim, lit only by candles. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars, hundreds of them, each holding what looked like drops of rain. Some glowed faintly blue, some gold, some dull and gray. "What is this place?" he asked. The woman touched one of the jars. The liquid inside rippled, glowing brighter under her fingertips. "It's what the valley remembers," she said quietly. "Every storm, every breath of rain, every time someone left and never returned." Elias stared, trying to make sense of her words. Then she looked at him and smiled, just faintly. "You're not the first to come looking for her," she said. but she's closer than you think. The candles flickered, as if something in the room had breathed. And outside, somewhere deep in the fog, thunder rolled, soft, distant, and familiar. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt final. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, dull and white. Inside, the air was warmer, scented with old wood and something faintly metallic. The smell of rain left too long in a jar. The woman moved quietly, her steps soft on the worn floorboards. She lit another candle, and its flame caught the edges of the shelves, where hundreds of glass jars shimmered faintly in the dimness. Each one was labeled in the same delicate handwriting, April 17th, the day the wind forgot. August 2nd, the night the hills sang. November 9th, the last rain before silence. Elias's eyes wandered over the words. Every jar held its own color, some deep as ocean water, some pale as morning mist. And when the light touched them just right, they seemed to pulse, as if breathing. He found his voice again. You said the valley remembers. What does that mean? The woman didn't look at him right away. She reached for a jar near the window, one marked March 21st, the day the boy arrived. She held it up. The liquid inside glowed faintly blue. When the rain falls here, she said, it takes something from whoever walks beneath it. A memory, a thought they meant to forget. The valley keeps them in water, in soil, in air. He frowned. That's not possible. She smiled, not mockingly, but almost sadly. It's not supposed to be. She set the jar down and gestured toward a chair by the hearth. Sit. You've walked far enough for one evening. The chair was old but sturdy, the wood smooth from years of hands. Elias sank into it, exhaustion settling in his bones. The warmth from the small fire felt almost unreal after the damp cold. Outside, the woman poured tea from a kettle that hissed softly on the stove. When she handed him a cup, he noticed the faint tremor in her hand, as if she'd been holding something invisible for too long. He took a sip. The tea was earthy and slightly bitter, but calming. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the pop of the fire and the faint clinking of glass when the wind nudged the shelves. Then, she said, almost to herself, you look like him. Elias looked up. Like who? Her gaze flickered toward the jars. For a moment, he thought she might not answer, but then she did, quietly. The one who built this place. He leaned forward, the name forming on his tongue before he even thought about it. My father. The woman didn't confirm or deny. She just studied the cup in her hands as though the steam might tell her the truth she wasn't ready to say. Elias's throat tightened. He hadn't spoken of his father in years. His mother never talked about him, only left small clues. Scattered across her letters like seeds, she hoped he'd find one day. And now, somehow, those clues had led him here. He stared at the fire. What happened to him? The woman exhaled slowly, her breath trembling in the candlelight. Some say he disappeared into the rain. Some say he became part of it. This valley doesn't lose people. It absorbs them. Every soul who lingers too long finds a reflection of themselves in the water. She reached for another jar, this one colorless, filled only with a faint silver shimmer that caught the light. He tried to build something here, she said, a way to keep moments from fading, to stop the forgetting. But the valley listened too closely. Elias felt something cold stir at the base of his spine. He looked at the jar in her hand. What's in that one? Her fingers tightened around it. This one is what's left of him, she said softly. Or maybe just what he wanted to remember. She set it back on the shelf and turned away. Silence stretched between them again, deep, almost heavy. Outside, rain had started to fall. The sound of it was strange, too soft, too deliberate. Each drop seemed to carry weight, like small voices tapping against the roof. The woman looked toward the window. It's begun again, she murmured. Every time it rains here, something wakes. Elias followed her gaze. Through the fogged glass, he could barely see the outline of the trees, their branches swaying in slow motion, as if underwater. The mist pulsed faintly with color, soft blue, then pale green, then gone. What's waking? He asked. She didn't turn to him. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. The memories that don't want to be forgotten. He didn't sleep that night. The rain kept falling, steady and rhythmic. And sometimes, when the fire dimmed, he thought he could hear voices in the sound, faint, stretched across time. A man's voice, a woman's laughter, the echo of a child running through wet grass, all of it blending into the same quiet rhythm, the valley's slow heartbeat. Asterisk, the rain went on through the night, soft at first, like a memory returning, then steadier, the kind of rain that doesn't fall on the valley, but through it. Elias sat by the window, the cup of tea cold in his hand, watching the fog pulse with light beyond the glass. It wasn't lightning. It was slower, deeper, like something beneath the ground was breathing. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, had fallen asleep in a chair near the fire. Her head rested against her arm, and the glow from the hearth painted her face in faint gold. In sleep, she looked younger, or maybe just less burdened. Elias tried closing his eyes, but rest wouldn't come. The sound of the rain wasn't like any rain he knew. Every drop carried a tone, a quiet note, and together they made a pattern that felt almost deliberate, as though the valley were whispering in a language too old for words. At some point, he must have drifted off, because when he opened his eyes, the world had changed. The room was brighter. Though the candles hadn't been lit, the rain still fell. But it no longer sounded like rain. It sounded like footsteps on water. He stood. The jars along the shelves shimmered faintly, and in some of them he could see shapes, blurred but human. A man walking beneath trees, a woman holding a lantern, a child running across a field of silver grass. He stepped closer. As he did, one of the jars trembled, then stilled again. Elias reached out, almost without thinking. His fingertips brushed the glass. The world tilted. He was no longer in the cottage. He was standing in the same valley, but brighter, younger. The air was warm, the grass alive with color. The fog was gone. In its place stretched a wide sky, and rain that fell in soft gold. He heard laughter, his mother's. She was standing at the edge of the field, calling his name. He was small again, maybe 6 or 7, running toward her. But when he reached her, her face wasn't quite right. Her smile too still, her eyes too deep. When he blinked, she was gone. In her place stood his father. He looked the same as in the old photographs. Tired eyes, gentle voice. "Elias," he said, "you shouldn't have followed her here." Elias tried to speak, but no sound came out. His father stepped closer, and when he did, the rain slowed. "This place doesn't remember the way you do," his father said quietly. "It keeps everything, even what you meant to let go." The golden rain turned darker. The air thickened. He felt the pull of something deep, downward, heavy. "Go back," his father said, "before it starts to take you too." And then everything shattered. The light, the rain, the sound. Elias gasped awake, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. The candles had burned low. The woman was awake now, standing by the shelves, watching him. "You touched it," she said softly. He nodded, breath shaking. "I saw them. My parents. Both of them." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. "The jars are not memories," she said. "They're echoes. The valley keeps what people lose, but it doesn't know how to give them back." He rubbed his face, still trembling. It felt real. "It was," she said. "That's what makes it dangerous." He stood and paced the room, trying to shake off the feeling that the air itself was still inside his lungs. "Why did my mother tell me to come here?" The woman looked at him for a long time before answering. "She didn't bring you here to find her. She brought you here to remember him, my father." She nodded. "He built this valley's memory. He wanted to trap time before it washed away. But he didn't realize what that would mean, to bind memory is to live inside it forever. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. Elias looked at her again, more closely this time. The curve of her face, the quiet grief in her eyes. Something in him shifted. "You knew him," he said. A pause. Then, "Yes," she whispered, "before the rain took him." Outside, thunder rolled again, but slow, almost human. The jars along the wall shimmered one by one, as if something inside them had stirred. Elias turned toward the sound. "What's happening?" The woman didn't move. Her voice was barely audible now. "The valley's remembering." And as she spoke, one jar cracked. A single drop of water slipped out and rolled down the glass, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Pulsing like a heartbeat. The jar kept dripping, one drop, then another. Each one made a sound, small, clear, like glass remembering a song. Elias and the woman watched in silence. The glow inside the jar dimmed, then brightened again, pulsing to the rhythm of something unseen. And then, slowly, the air began to change. The mist that had stayed outside started to curl through the gaps in the window frame, soft and silver. The fire flickered, uneasy. All around them, the other jars began to hum, faint, low, almost like a choir underwater. Elias stepped back. "What's happening?" The woman didn't answer at first. She was staring at the shelf, her hand hovering over another jar. One labeled the day the river turned quiet. The valley's waking faster than it should. "Something you did pulled it forward." He glanced at the jar that had cracked. "I touched it." Her eyes met his. "Then it's already inside you." The words sank in like cold rain. Elias pressed his palm against his chest, half expecting to feel something moving there. But there was only the dull rhythm of his heart. "I don't understand," he said. "What does that mean?" She moved to the table, her hands trembling as she began packing something into a satchel. An oil lamp, a small book, pieces of folded paper. "It means you'll start remembering things that never happened," she said. "The valley doesn't just hold memory, it shares it." She looked up at him again, her voice softer now. "If you stay too long, you won't know which life was yours." The rain outside was steady now, not loud, just endless. Every few seconds, a faint flash of light passed through the fog, like lightning slowed to a crawl. Elise's mind spun. His father, his mother, the way the jar had shown them so vividly, the way the air had felt alive. He wanted to believe it was a dream. But dreams didn't leave the taste of rain on your lips. He sat down, the floor creaking beneath him. "What happens if I leave?" The woman's hands stilled. "You can't," she said quietly. "Not until the valley lets you." He stared at her. "And when will that be?" She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted one of the jars, one glowing faintly gold, and carried it to him. "This one is yours," she said. Elias frowned. "I've never seen that before." "You have," she said. "You just forgot." The glass was warm, too warm. The liquid inside shimmered like sunlight through water the moment his fingers closed around it. The room fell away. He was standing in a field of tall grass. The rain was gone. The world was clear and still. In the distance, a house, not the cottage, but a small home with blue shutters and a crooked roof. He knew this place. It was the house he'd grown up in. The sound of footsteps behind him. He turned. His mother stood there, younger than he remembered, her hair unbraided, her hands clean of ink. She smiled the same way she used to when he woke from nightmares. "You shouldn't have come back here, Eli," she said. He opened his mouth, but she raised a hand. "It's all right. You'll understand soon. Just don't listen to the rain." Her face flickered like a reflection on rippling water. And then she was gone. He blinked, and the cottage returned. The jar still in his hands, still glowing softly. The woman stood near the shelves, watching him with that same heavy calm. "You see, Bella," she said, "the valley knows what to show you. It remembers what you miss most." Elias set the jar down carefully, his hands shaking. "Why would it do that?" "Because that's what it's made of," she said. "Longing, regret, the weight of things we meant to let go but never could." She turned toward the window, where the fog pulsed faintly again. "If you want to find your mother, you'll have to follow the rain where it falls the strongest." He followed her gaze. Down the slope, past the birch trees, he could see the faint outline of the well, the same one he'd found when he arrived. Even through the mist, he could tell something had changed. Light moved inside it, slow and deep, like the reflection of stars underwater. "The well," he murmured. She nodded. "It's where he began, and where it all ends." Elias turned back toward her. "You said my father built this place." "I said he tried to," she replied. "But you can't build a memory. You can only get lost inside one." The wind rose then, not from outside, but from somewhere within the room. The candles fluttered. The shelves trembled. A few jars toppled and broke, spilling their light onto the floor like melting rain. Each drop shimmered tiny, glowing fragments of lives that weren't his dot. And somewhere deep in the valley, the thunder answered. The woman met his eyes again. "If you still want to find her," she said, "you'll have to go to the heart of it. The well." She nodded. "But remember, once you look into it, it will look back." Morning came without color. Just a dim light pressing through the fog, soft and silver. Like the sky was made of breath. The rain had stopped, though the air still carried its weight. Every leaf, every blade of grass was slick with it, trembling under the faint wind. Elias stepped outside the cottage. The door creaked as if the house were reluctant to let him go. Behind him, the woman stood in the doorway, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. "You don't have to do this now," she said. He adjusted the strap of his pack. "If I wait, I'll lose my nerve." She nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding. "The well remembers everything," she said. "It might not give you what you want." He looked toward the hill, where the mist curled in pale layers. "I just want the truth." Her eyes softened. "The valley never tells one truth. It tells them all, and none of them last." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just turned away. The path back to the well felt different now. The ground was slick, and the fog moved like water, flowing around his knees as he walked. Every few steps, he'd hear something behind him, a whisper, a footstep, a breath that wasn't his. But when he turned, there was only mist. He began to notice the trees. Their trunks shimmered faintly, as if wet from rain that wasn't falling, and carved into some of them small marks, half-faded symbols, spirals, lines, circles that seemed to shift when he looked away. Once, he caught a glimpse of something between the trees, a flash of movement, like a figure turning a corner. He froze. Who's there? Only silence answered, soft and endless. But when he looked down, he saw footprints, not his, pressed deep into the mud. Small, bare ones. He followed. The footprints led him to a clearing he didn't remember. A pool sat at its center, shallow, maybe knee-deep, perfectly still. Its surface mirrored the sky, though the clouds above were broken, and scattered across it like tiny stars floated petals, white, pale blue, faint pink. He crouched beside the pool. The air smelled like rain and memory, sharp, sweet, heavy dot when he touched the surface. The water rippled once, and an image appeared. Not a reflection, a memory. A child himself, years ago, sitting beside the same pool, tossing pebbles into it. A woman nearby, his mother, humming softly as she washed something in her hands. The sound of her voice drifted through the air, faint but clear. That same song she used to hum when the storms frightened him. He remembered it without realizing he'd forgotten. He watched, breath caught in his chest. The image blurred, then shifted. The same woman, older now, standing alone beside the pool. The petals gone. She knelt, cupped the water in her hands, and whispered something he couldn't hear. Then she poured it back, and the pool began to glow. Elias reached closer straining to hear her words. But before he could, the water turned dark, and her reflection looked up directly at him. It wasn't just a memory anymore. Her eyes were alive, aware. "Elias," she whispered. He stumbled back. Heart pounding, the voice came again, from the water, from the air, from everywhere. "You have to finish what he started." The pool went still again. Only the petals floated. Elias knelt, shaking. The fog around him shifted, curling into faint shapes, faces maybe, or fragments of voices. "Finish what who started," he whispered. The air stirred, carrying the echo of his mother's voice. "The well remembers. Find it before it finds you." And then the mist closed around him again, swallowing everything. By the time he found the well, the sky had dimmed back into gray. It stood in its hollow like before, but now light pulsed deep inside it, faint and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Elias stood at the edge, his reflection trembling in the dark water below. He felt it again, that pull, deep in his chest, like the valley was breathing with him. The hum of the jars, the pulse of the fog, the whisper of rain, all of it coming from the same place. He leaned forward, and in the water, something moved. A shape, human, reaching upward, hand first. For a second, he thought it was his own reflection. Then the hand broke the surface, pale, wet, trembling, and gripped the edge of the stone. Elias stumbled backward, breath frozen. The hand hung there for a heartbeat. Then it slipped away, vanishing into the depths again, leaving only ripples. The air grew colder, and from somewhere deep below, he heard a sound, not a voice, not a word, but something between them, like the valley was whispering his name. Asterisk, he stepped closer again, whispering to the dark, "What are you trying to show me?" The only answer was a faint shimmer, light shifting just below the surface. He leaned closer, his face reflected in the water, and for a moment, only a heartbeat, he saw her. The woman from the cottage, standing where he stood, her hand resting on the stone, her eyes full of rain. Then she was gone. Then she was gone. He stood there for a long time, unmoving. The world was silent now. Even the mist had stopped moving, as if the valley were holding its breath. And somewhere in that stillness, Elias realized the valley wasn't remembering anymore. It was waiting. Asterisk, by the time Elias reached the cottage again, night had already begun to fold over the hills. The mist had turned silver under the moon, curling low over the grass. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the earth itself was quietly watching him. The cottage lights were still on. A thin trail of smoke rose from the chimney, winding up into the pale dark. He stood at the gate, for a long time before walking in. Inside, the air was thick with warmth and the faint smell of herbs. The woman sat at the table, back straight, hands clasped, waiting, as if she'd known exactly when he'd return. He closed the door softly behind him. "I found the well." She didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the window, where mist pressed faintly against the glass. "What did it show you?" He hesitated. "I saw my mother." That made her look at him, slow, like she was afraid to move too quickly. "What did she say?" Elias swallowed hard. "She said I had to finish what he started." He paused. Who was she talking about? The woman's hands tightened slightly on the table. She wasn't just talking about one person. Only the fire cracked, slow, steady, like breathing. Elias sat across from her. The wood beneath him creaked softly, echoing through the still room. He could feel something shifting, not in the house, but in her. "When I first came here," he said, "you told me this valley remembers everything. But you didn't tell me how you knew." Her gaze didn't waver. "I know because I've been part of it longer than I should have been." He frowned. "You mean you've lived here all your life?" She shook her head slowly. "I mean the valley doesn't let go of people who try to leave." He waited. She leaned back, the chair sighing beneath her. "Long before you were born, your father came here looking for water. The village was dry, the crops dying. He thought the old well could be reopened. He found it, and something found him back." Elias felt his heart beat in his throat. "What do you mean, found him back?" Her eyes softened. "He gave something to the valley. A promise, or maybe a part of himself. When he didn't return, your mother came here searching, and she made the same mistake." The fire popped. Outside, wind brushed the eaves, soft and thin. Elias looked down at his hands. They were trembling. She said, "I had to finish what he started. And now, the valley remembers you." He stared at her. "What does it want?" She took a long breath, the kind that sounds like the end of something. "It doesn't want anything. The valley only mirrors what's missing. That's how it stays alive." He looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, the fog had thickened again, curling into faint shapes, human, almost. "So it remembers what we've lost. It remembers who," she said quietly, "and it keeps them here where they can't fade." "You're saying my parents are still here, in a way." He stood suddenly, pacing to the window. The reflection in the glass looked strange, slightly delayed, like a memory catching up to him. When he turned back, the woman hadn't moved. He spoke quietly. "I saw someone at the well." A hand came out of the water. Her eyes flickered, just for a heartbeat. "What did you do?" "Nothing," he said. "I just watched." "Good," she murmured. Don't touch the water. Not yet. He stared at her. Why? What happens if I do? She looked past him, toward the window where the fog now pressed in thicker, heavier. Then the valley stops remembering for you, she said softly, and starts remembering through you. Outside, the wind had died completely. Only the sound of the fire filled the room, a slow, steady heartbeat. Elias sat again, hands clasped, trying to steady his breathing. It felt like the air itself was listening. He spoke finally, voice small. What did my father find at the well? She looked into the fire, and when she spoke, it was barely a whisper. He found the bottom. Elias frowned. There's no bottom. That's what he said, she replied, until he dropped the lantern. The room went quiet again. He waited, but she didn't continue. Finally, he asked, what did he see? She looked up at him, and for the first time, there was fear in her eyes. He saw himself falling upward. Neither of them spoke for a long time after that. The fire burned low. The mist outside pressed closer, its shapes now more distinct, outlines of faces. Drifting slow past the window, Elias couldn't tell if they were looking in, or if they were reflections looking out. He whispered to himself, the valley remembers everything. And from outside, in the faint hush of the windless dark, something whispered back. Asterisk, that night, Elias couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the sound of the well returned, that deep, rhythmic hum rising from somewhere below the earth. He lay still for hours, listening. The woman had gone quiet in the next room. The fire had burned out, leaving only a soft orange pulse under the ash dot, and yet the cottage breathed. The walls creaked as if remembering old storms. The wind whispered through the cracks, carrying faint voices, too soft to make out, too close to ignore. When Elias finally got up, the air was colder. He wrapped his coat tight and stepped outside. The valley stretched out beneath the moon, quiet, silver, endless. The fog moved differently now, swirling in slow, deliberate shapes. Everywhere he looked, he thought he saw motion, not alive, but aware. The path to the well shimmered faintly, as if light were buried just beneath the soil. He didn't mean to walk there, but his feet knew the way. The night was full of sounds that didn't belong. Soft laughter, a door closing somewhere far away, the faint hum of the jars from the cottage shelf, even though they weren't with him. When he reached the clearing, the pool he'd seen earlier was gone. Only the ground remained, damp and dark, breathing faint mist. He looked up toward the hill, and there it was again, the well glowing faintly in the dark, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Elias stepped closer. He could feel the pull again, deep in his chest, the same pull he'd felt as a child standing in a storm. When thunder sounded too human to be sky, he knelt beside the well. The air here felt heavier, like it was full of someone else's memory. He looked down, and the surface shifted. It wasn't water anymore. It was sky, a pale, endless gray that seemed to move without wind. And within it, faint images began to ripple, flickers of light, faces, fragments of time. A man, his father, standing by the same well, holding a lantern that burned green instead of gold. The woman, younger, watching from a distance. The air thick with rain. He heard his father's voice. "Don't come closer." The lantern light flickered, and in that light, the shadows around him moved like something beneath the earth was trying to climb upward. Elias reached forward, instinctively. He wanted to touch the reflection, to call out, but the moment his fingers brushed the surface, the image broke. The well filled with dark again, deeper than before. Something in the air shifted, like pressure dropping before a storm. Then he heard it. A voice, not loud, not far. It came from below. Elias. He froze. The voice wasn't his father's. It wasn't his mother's. It was his own. He stumbled back, breathing hard. The sound kept rising, quiet but constant, like his own voice repeating from beneath the ground. Over and over, steady and calm. He moved away, but the echo followed him. Every step, every breath, it came with him, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead. By the time he reached the cottage again, the horizon had begun to pale, not dawn yet, just the color that comes before light. He opened the door quietly. The woman was awake, sitting by the cold fireplace, eyes fixed on the wall. She looked at him without surprise. "You went to the well again," T nodded. "I heard myself." Her expression didn't change. "Then it's begun." He sat down slowly across from her. "What's happening to me?" She leaned forward, voice low. "The valley is showing you what it remembers of you. Not what you think you lived, but what it kept." He frowned. "How can it remember something that never happened?" "It didn't say it never happened," she said softly. "Just that it wasn't yours yet." He stared at her. "That doesn't make sense." "It will," she said, "when the valley starts dreaming through you." The window glass shivered suddenly. Just a small vibration, like someone brushing their hand along it from the outside. Eli's turned, heart tightening. Outside, the fog was pressed against the window again. And through it, faint faces formed his father's, his mother's, and one he didn't recognize, a child's. They were watching. He whispered, "What do they want?" The woman's voice was steady. "They want you to remember what they couldn't." He turned back to her. "What if I don't want to?" For the first time, she smiled, small, tired, almost kind. Then the valley will keep trying until you do. Outside, the fog thickened until the world disappeared. The walls creaked. The air hummed softly, like something vast was breathing just beneath the earth. Elias closed his eyes. The hum settled into rhythm, slow, familiar. He didn't know if it was the valley's heartbeat, or his own, his heartbeat, or his own. The morning was quiet, but not still. The air had that strange weight again, like sound existed just out of reach. Humming below the edge of hearing. Elias stood by the window. Outside, the valley looked unchanged. Mist, grass, trees half lost in the gray. But something was wrong with the light dot. It shimmered slightly, bending in small pulses, like the air was rippling with old breath. Behind him, the woman moved softly through the cottage, filling a kettle, striking a match. The faint smell of smoke and herbs spread through the room. "You shouldn't have gone to the well alone," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to," he replied. "It felt like I was already walking there before I decided to." "That's how it starts," she murmured. "The valley walks you." He didn't answer. His thoughts kept circling back to the reflection, the voice calling from below. His own voice, but not his. He rubbed his temples, trying to clear the weight in his head. It didn't help. Every time he blinked, flashes appeared, faint, like lightning behind his eyelids. A lantern swinging, rain hammering against stone, someone shouting his name through the dark. He shook his head hard, but when he opened his eyes again, he wasn't in the cottage anymore. He was standing in the valley, only it wasn't the valley he knew. The hills were bare, the grass burned dry, the air full of dust instead of mist. Above, the sky had no color, just pale, hollow light. He turned slowly, and there, by the well, a man stood tall, shoulders broad, the same build, the same stillness. His father. The lantern in his hand burned green, steady and silent. He was younger than Elias remembered, though his eyes carried the same tired calm. Elias tried to speak, but no sound came. The world around him held its breath. His father lowered the lantern toward the well. The flame flickered once, twice, then steadied. He whispered something Elias couldn't hear. Then, without hesitation, he dropped the lantern in. The green light fell slowly, too slowly, like sinking through water instead of air. It never went out. It just kept falling. And as it fell, the dry earth around the well began to darken, cracks filling with water, one by one. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. Within moments, the barren valley was alive again, the scent of wet soil rising thick into the air. The sound of it filled everything. Elias could feel it, soaking through his clothes, dripping down his face. But when he wiped his cheek, his hand came away clean. He turned to call out, but the man was gone. Only the sound of rain remained. Then he heard footsteps. A child ran past him, barefoot, laughing, carrying a small jar filled with water. Elias turned, and for a brief second, the child's face caught the light. It was him, younger, the same scar near his lip, the same uneven hair. The boy ran toward the cottage, the same one, though newer, brighter, alive. Someone called from the doorway, his mother's voice, clear and warm. Elias, bring it inside before you spill it. He wanted to go after them, to speak, to step closer, but the rain began to fall harder, turning everything white. The air thickened, like fog made of memory, and then a sound broke through it. A knock. He opened his eyes. He was back in the cottage. The woman stood near the door, her hand frozen mid-air. "You're awake," she said softly. Elias blinked. His heart was still racing. "What happened?" "You fell," she said. "You were standing by the window one moment, then you were on the floor." He rubbed his head. "Was I dreaming?" She looked at him carefully. "Not anymore." He sat slowly, trying to steady his breathing. The room around him felt strange, like it was both here and somewhere else at once. The sound of rain still lingered in his ears, though outside, the world was silent. He looked at her. "I saw him." She didn't ask, "Who?" The look in her eyes said she already knew. He continued, voice low. He dropped the lantern into the well. It turned the valley green again. Her expression softened, part sadness, part recognition. "He didn't light the well to bring back the rain," she said. "He lit it to keep it." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked at the floor. The valley was never dying. It was sleeping. He woke it too deeply, and it took what it could, everything that carried water inside it. Elias felt his stomach twist. "You mean yes?" she said quietly. It took him first. The kettle began to whistle. Neither of them moved. Elias sat in silence, listening to that sharp, steady sound. It reminded him of rain dot. When it stopped, the room fell quiet again. He spoke, finally. "If the valley took him, why do I keep hearing myself?" She looked at him then, really looked, and there was no calm left in her eyes. "Because when the valley remembers too long," she said softly, "it forgets who's still alive." Asterisk. The next morning, the world felt wrong. Not broken, just rearranged. Elias woke to find the light in the room leaning the wrong way. Shadows falling where they shouldn't. The window that used to face the east now showed the hill where the well stood. He stared at it, heart still and unsure. The valley outside was moving. Not in the way wind moves trees. It was deeper, slower. The ground itself seemed to breathe, the fog pulling in and out with its rhythm. The woman was gone. Her chair sat empty by the cold hearth, a cup half full beside it. But on the table, where she had kept her small jars, one was missing, the one that used to hum. Elias stepped outside. The air was wet, though no rain had fallen. The mist clung to his skin like breath. He looked toward the hill. For the first time, he could see the well clearly. No fog, no haze, just stone, clean and dark. It looked closer than before. Too close, he started walking. Each step sank slightly, as if the ground remembered him. Somewhere beneath the soil, water murmured softly. Not far, not near, just constant. Every few steps, he'd catch a flicker in the corner of his eye, a face, a hand, a reflection that disappeared when he turned. And in the distance, faint and steady, someone was humming. The same melody his mother used to hum when he was small. When he reached the hill, the humming stopped. The well stood open, waiting. Around it, the grass was wet with dew, or maybe tears. He looked down into the water. The surface rippled once, then stilled. At first, he saw only his reflection. Then it changed. The face staring back at him was older, lined, bearded, tired. His father's. And yet, when the reflection moved its mouth, Elias felt the words form in his own throat. Not every memory belongs to the one who lived it. The sound came from both mouths at once. It felt wrong and right all at once. Elias stumbled back, shaking his head. This isn't real. But the reflection kept speaking, his voice, his father's, overlapping, echoing. You wanted to finish what I started. This is what it means. Elias's pulse quickened. What do you want from me? The reflection smiled, gently, sadly. It isn't about wanting. The valley doesn't take. It trades. Trades what? Names? Said the reflection. Memories? Time. It keeps what you forget. Elias stepped closer to the well again. He could see the reflection clearly now, not distorted, not broken. It looked more alive than he felt. His voice came out a whisper. What happens if I remember everything? The reflection's eyes softened. Then you become part of what remembers. Something shifted below. The hum of the well deepened, turning into a slow vibration that he could feel through his feet. The ground trembled softly, and the water's surface began to glow faintly. Not green now, but pale blue, like moonlight caught underwater. Elias knelt beside it. For the first time, he didn't feel afraid. just quiet. He looked down again. The reflection was gone. Only darkness remained, deep and endless. Then a single sound rose from below. A soft voice calling his name. This time, it was his mother. He leaned closer. Her voice was faint, almost carried by water. "You remember now," she said. "I don't understand. You just don't want to." The air around him changed. Warmer now, gentler. He could smell the herbs from the cottage, the rain from years ago, the damp earth of home. And suddenly, it wasn't the valley in front of him anymore. He was standing in the old house from his childhood. The same cracked walls, the same window that leaked in storms. Outside, rain fell steady and soft. His mother was there, sitting by the table, sewing something in her lap. She looked up and smiled like she'd been expecting him. Elias stood frozen, heart hammering. "Am I dreaming?" She didn't answer. She just said, "You shouldn't have gone back to the valley." "I had to," he whispered. "You were there." She nodded slightly. "I was, and so were you." He looked around. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Even the dust on the shelves looked placed. He turned back to her. "Where's father?" Her hands stopped moving. "He's still falling." The words hung in the air, heavy and slow. The sound of rain softened. Elias took a step forward. "Then I'll go find him." She looked up, her eyes bright with something like fear. "If you do, you won't come back." He hesitated. "Maybe I'm not supposed to." Her expression broke. Sadness, pride, love, all in one breath. "Then take the light," she whispered. When he looked down, the green lantern was in his hands. It flickered once, then burned steady. The world began to fade. The house dissolved, the rain with it. The valley's hum returned, deep and alive. He stood again at the well, only now. The glow inside it matched the lantern in his hand. For a moment, he felt weightless. The air moved through him instead of around him. He lifted the lantern over the water. The flame leaned toward the surface, as if reaching for its reflection. And then, from deep below, something reached back. A hand, wet, familiar, reaching not for the lantern, for him. For him. Elias didn't move. He whispered, "I remember." The hand touched his dot. Light filled the valley. Asterisk. The wind began changing again that week. It no longer came from the sea. It came from the inland fields, carrying dry leaves and the smell of earth. Elias knew it meant the season had finally turned, though he hadn't marked a calendar in years. The evenings grew shorter, the light sharper. He stood by his window one afternoon, the same spot he'd watched so many sunsets from, and felt something off. The horizon was too quiet. The sea too still. The light, though golden, seemed thinner, like it was slipping through unseen cracks. He turned toward the shelves. The jars were humming again. Softly at first, a vibration through the wood. Then a low murmur that filled the room. The sound wasn't unpleasant. It was almost like hearing a choir from far away. Their voices folded inside glass dot. He reached out, brushing dust from one jar. Inside, the glow pulsed faintly. The color was the shade of old apricots and fading embers. His own label, Autumn Evening, 1974. He remembered that one. He'd been a young man, walking with her along the cliffs, a knitted scarf between them. She laughed that night, trying to catch the wind in her hands. He'd sealed that light before it faded, but now it shimmered differently, brighter, wilder, and something whispered from within. Elias. He froze. The voice was faint but clear. A woman's voice, soft and trembling. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the glass. Elias, it's getting dark. His hands shook. He looked across the shelves, more jars glowing faintly now, soft murmurs rising from them. Dozens of evenings calling to him, blending into a chorus of gentle voices, each one carrying pieces of his past. He sank into his chair. The room felt smaller, like the air itself was thick with memory. After a while, he reached for his pen, that same worn fountain pen, the one that always leaked a little ink at the edges. He pulled out the notebook where he'd written every date, every sunset, every shade, and on a fresh page, he wrote, "The evenings are waking." He closed the notebook and stared at the horizon through the window. The sky was still, no wind, but in the corner of the room, one jar flickered on its own, a pale blue glow. New and unfamiliar. He hadn't collected that one. He walked toward it slowly. The label was blank. The glass felt cold to the touch, colder than the air around it, and deep inside, the light moved like liquid, like the sky before a storm. He held it up near the window, and for a moment he saw his reflection inside, but younger, standing on the shore, holding a jar of his own. Behind that reflection, faintly, was a second figure. She was smiling. Elias blinked hard. The image faded. Only his own tired face remained. Still, he didn't put the jar back. He carried it to his table and set it beside his chair. And that night, he didn't sleep. He just listened to the jars humming, to the waves whispering far below the hill, to the faint sound of wind returning from the sea. Something was changing. Something was coming back. Asterisk, that night, the sound in the house changed. It wasn't just the whispering hum anymore. It was softer, closer, almost like breathing. Elias sat in his old chair, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring at the faint blue jar on the table. It gave off a glow that wasn't like the others. Those had always been warm, hues of amber, coral, rose. This one was pale and cool, a light that pulsed like it had a heartbeat of its own. He could feel it in his chest. Each time the light flared, something in him echoed back. He hadn't meant to keep it there, but each time he tried to move it back to the shelf, a wave of dizziness washed over him. So he left it. It seemed content there, beside the open notebook and the empty teacup. The other jars stayed silent for a while, until the clock struck midnight. Then one of them let out a sound, a faint exhale. Not like glass cracking, not wind, more like someone sighing after holding their breath for years. Elias looked up. The sound came from the top shelf, a jar labeled Spring Evening, 1983. Inside, the room felt alive, not in a frightening way, but like something old and patient had finally decided to wake. The blue jar flickered faster, and before his eyes, the smallest ripple passed through its glass, bending the air around it like heat above a candle flame. He reached forward, then stopped. The air smelled different, not the salt of the sea or the dust of the cottage. It smelled of rain, fresh, heavy, with that soft sweetness that clings to old roads. He hadn't smelled rain like that in years. He turned to the window. Outside, the stars were gone. A thin mist rolled across the hill, swallowing the moonlight. He blinked once, and when he turned back, the jar was open. No crack, no noise, just open. The lid had rolled onto the table, and the blue light had spread across the wood like spilled ink. It wasn't light anymore. It was moving air. He could feel it, cool and gentle, like twilight wind brushing against his hands. He whispered to himself, "This can't be." But the breeze kept spreading, curling through the room. It carried faint sounds with it, distant waves, children laughing, gulls calling overhead. Elias stumbled back, breath caught. He knew those sounds. That was the evening from his youth, the one before everything had gone wrong. He whispered her name without thinking. The air paused, as if listening. Then the breeze turned, flowing toward the shelves. One by one, the jars began to hum again, different tones, weaving together until the whole room sounded like the horizon was inside it. The blue light spread further, tracing cracks of color across the wooden walls. Each shimmer showed glimpses, flickers of the life he'd bottled away. A bode, a laugh, her hand reaching for his dot, and then the light dimmed. Everything went quiet. Elias stood alone in the silence, heart trembling. The jars were still sealed, but now faint trails of color swirled inside them, as if something had stirred awake beneath the surface. He didn't know if it was the sea, or the past, or the boundary between them breaking open. But for the first time in years, the air in his house felt alive. He sat back down, lit the candle, and whispered, "All right then, show me what you've been keeping." The flame flickered once, and the blue jar pulsed softly in reply. By morning, the light had faded. The blue jar sat quietly beside the window, no glow left inside it. Elias thought maybe it had all been a dream, a strange one, vivid but harmless. He made tea, sat by the window, and watched the tide crawl up the shore. The sea looked normal, no ripples of light, no whisper of forgotten voices, just the steady hush of water folding against sand. He let out a long breath. His hands still shook when he lifted the cup. But when he turned toward the shelf, he stopped. One of the jars was missing. He looked again, counting each row, each familiar label. Every one was there, except one space on the middle shelf. Late summer evening, 1977. The jar was gone. He searched the whole cottage, though he knew it was useless. The jars never moved. He'd kept them like relics, perfectly still, their odor never changing. Yet the space on the shelf looked cold, like the wood beneath it had just lost its warmth. Outside, the air shifted. The light through the window turned golden, not like morning light, but the color of that same evening long ago. Elias felt his pulse quicken. He stepped outside, the wind touching his face like a memory brushing skin. Down the slope, near the edge of the sea, stood the jar, half buried in sand. Its light faint but pulsing, soft amber and gold. He walked toward it slowly. Each step felt heavier, as if he was walking through time itself. When he reached the shore, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Footprints, small ones, leading from the jar to the water's edge. Barefoot, light, familiar. He knelt, the sea breeze brushing his hair. The air smelled of that year, salt and lilac. A scent he hadn't felt since she was alive. The tide whispered, carrying soft laughter. Not sharp or loud, just gentle, like the sound you hear when you're almost asleep. He could hear her in it. He turned toward the horizon. For a heartbeat, he saw her there, not solid, but a shimmer in the mist. She was walking along the waterline, her dress fluttering in the wind, sunlight clinging to her hair. He didn't call out. He couldn't. The moment he tried to move, the image rippled like a reflection on disturbed water and faded. The sea turned plain again. He stood there a long time, the jar glowing faintly beside him. When the light inside finally went out, he picked it up, feeling its weight heavier now, as if the evening had returned to rest. Back inside the cottage, he placed it carefully back on the shelf. And as he did, he saw something new. Faint streaks of light swirling behind the glass, not trapped, not still, moving freely like they were breathing again. He whispered to himself, "They're not memories anymore." He didn't know what they were, only that the past was no longer quiet, and the house no longer his alone. That night, as he lay in bed, he could hear the faintest sounds again: footsteps on the floorboards, laughter behind the walls, the distant ringing of the sea bells that had stopped decades ago. And in the corner of the room, the blue jar glowed once more, softly, steadily, softly, steadily. By the third night, Elias stopped pretending to sleep. There was no point. The world outside his window no longer followed night and day. At dusk, the air shimmered. Soft, golden light poured through the cracks, even when the sun had already gone down. And when morning came, the shadows still held traces of sunset, clinging to corners like the light refused to leave. The jars had stopped glowing, one by one. But now the glow came from the walls themselves. Soft streaks of amber and rose, breathing across the wooden boards, sometimes for only a second. He thought he could see the faint shapes of clouds drifting through his ceiling. He didn't panic. He just sat with it, a cup of tea cooling beside him, his old chair creaking under slow movements. When you live with the past long enough, he thought, maybe it begins to live with you too. It began with small things, the smell of salt in the morning, even though the tide was miles away, the faint reflection of the moon in his teacup at noon, the echo of a door closing when no one had left. But then came the bigger shifts. One evening, he opened his front door and saw his garden bathed in a kind of golden twilight that shouldn't have existed. The flowers open, though the sky above them was dark. A soft wind moved through the grass. Carrying the hush of waves, he stepped outside. The air had that thickness again, like the space between rain and memory. The world around him felt layered, almost doubled. He could see his garden as it was overgrown and dim, and through it, another one, bright and alive, the way it used to be. He walked forward. For every step, the world shifted gently between now and then. The smell of mint, the sound of her voice calling from the kitchen window. His heart ached, but it was the kind of ache that came from something beautiful trying to return. When he went back inside, the house didn't greet him with silence. It felt like walking into a place mid-conversation. There was music, faint, distant, the soft crackle of a radio from another year. The scent of stew on the stove, though his kitchen was empty. And there, on the wall, a framed picture that hadn't been there before him and her. Sitting on the rocks near the shore, the same jar between them. He stepped closer. The photo shimmered faintly, then blinked out Only dust and the old wooden wall remained. He stood still for a long time, listening. The jars weren't humming anymore. They were quiet, resting, maybe, but the world around them wasn't. The air felt alive with quiet motion, like all the evenings he'd kept were slowly walking the house, exploring it, remembering its corners. He whispered to the empty room, "You're not lost, are you?" A faint breath of wind moved through, brushing his face, warm, soft, gone in a moment. He smiled without realizing it, then sat by the window, notebook open, and wrote a single line: "The evenings are home." And for the first time since she'd gone, Elias didn't feel alone. Asterisk, the first sign, came quietly. It was the color of the water. For as long as Elias could remember, the sea beyond his hill had been the same dull blue-gray, a tired shade, like the ocean had long stopped caring to reflect the sky. But that morning, it shimmered gold, not bright, not sharp, soft, hazy gold. The kind that lingers in the air long after sunset has gone. He stood on the porch, mug warming his hands, and just stared. The light wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from the water itself. The tide had drawn strange lines along the sand, swirls that looked almost like handwriting. For a second, he thought it spelled something, but when he blinked, the lines washed away. He thought maybe his eyes were playing tricks. Maybe he was just tired. But then the air shifted, that familiar stillness again. The kind that filled the house when the jars began to hum. Only this time, it came from the sea. Elias stepped down the path, the grass brushing against his legs. Each step felt slower than it should have been, not heavy, but thick, like the air was gently resisting him, holding him inside its rhythm. When he reached the shore, he saw something impossible. The horizon looked closer, like the world had folded a little, tucking itself around the coast, and along the water's edge, small glowing shapes floated just above the tide glass jars. Dozens of them, drifting like lanterns. They weren't his. These were older, worn, some cracked, some clouded, each filled with faint light. The colors of lost evenings that had belonged to someone else. He stood there in silence, the sea breeze brushing his coat, the low hum of the jars rising and falling like breathing. He could hear them, faint, almost inaudible voices, whispering words he didn't know, names, laughter, songs. It hit him then. He hadn't been the only one keeping time. The sea had been doing it too. All this while, it had been swallowing evenings that others had let slip away, collecting them in the dark, keeping them safe until someone remembered how to listen. He knelt by the shore, his fingers touching the nearest jar. Inside, the light was a deep rose, soft and trembling. The moment he touched it, the sound grew clearer. A child's voice, a lullaby half forgotten. Then a woman's voice, humming along. He felt his throat tighten. Not her, not his lost evening. Someone else's, but it didn't matter. It was the same kind of tenderness, the same fragile peace. The jar drifted from his hand, floating back into the tide. As it did, the rest followed, dozens of tiny lights gliding toward the horizon until the whole sea shimmered. Like a field of stars, Elias stood and whispered, "You've been waiting too." The wind carried his voice out over the water and far beyond the mist. He thought he saw shapes, moving people, walking along invisible paths just above the waves, carrying jars of their own. He didn't feel afraid. He felt right. The sea had remembered, and now it was returning everything when Elias turned to walk back home. He could see faint glimmers rising through the grass, small points of light, like tiny evenings climbing back toward the cottage. The past wasn't just visiting anymore. It was coming to stay, asterisks by dusk. The sea's glow had reached the valley. It wasn't sudden. It crept in quietly, like light soaking through cloth. The roads that led to the village shimmered faintly, the dust along their edges turning gold, as if touched by a sun that no one could see. Elias stood at the top of the hill, coat buttoned against the wind. The air felt different, heavier, yet strangely kind. It smelled of wood smoke and sea air, and underneath that, something sweeter. Lilac, maybe, or the echo of it. From his cottage, he could see the rooftops below. Smoke curled from chimneys, but the smoke didn't rise. It drifted sideways, folding into the sky, like fog on the tide. He walked down the path slowly, his steps matching the rhythm of the evening. The closer he got, the more the sounds changed. The bells of the harbor chimed softly, though they hadn't rung in years. A fisherman's whistle floated on the breeze, the same tune Elias remembered from his youth, though the man who used to whistle it had long since passed. And then, at the edge of the square, Elias stopped. The village looked exactly as it had decades ago. The same stalls, the same faded signs. Children ran between the wells, their laughter soft and distant, almost see-through, like light shaped into sound. But alongside them walked others, the villagers, as they were now, older, slower, confused. Some watched their younger selves without understanding what they were seeing. Others just stood still, as if afraid to move in case the spell broke. Elias stepped forward. The cobblestones cool beneath his shoes. Everywhere he looked, the past and the present folded together. The baker setting down a loaf beside the ghost of his younger self. A woman walking with her mother's reflection beside her, and through it all, the air shimmered, layers of time moving like thin sheets of glass, overlapping but never colliding. One of the villagers turned to him. "Elias," she said, her voice trembling. He recognized her Moran, who used to keep the post office. Her hair was silver now, her eyes softer. Behind her, a younger Moran walked past, laughing with a man who carried a letter in his hand. "They're back," she whispered. Her gaze drifted to the street. "The evenings. I see them everywhere." He nodded, unable to speak. Together, they watched as the younger villagers passed like flickers of light, each carrying a moment of their old lives, some smiling, some weeping. It wasn't haunting, it was gentle, like the world was letting them remember without pain. At the far end of the street, a door opened and a boy ran out holding a jar, a small glass one that glowed faintly from within. He set it down on the ground, whispering to it before running back inside. Elias felt his throat tighten. It was the same kind of jar, the same kind he'd used. He turned to Maren. "Do you see it?" She nodded slowly. "I think we all did once. We just forgot." Her voice carried a tremor of wonder, not fear. The wind brushed past them, soft and warm, carrying the faint hum of the sea. Above, the sky shifted, neither day nor night, but something in between, the color of a held breath. And as Elias looked around the square, he realized something quietly beautiful. No one was trying to change anything. The villagers didn't reach for their younger selves or chased their lost moments. They simply stood and watched, smiling, crying, remembering, as if grateful to see what once was, without needing it back. For the first time, he understood. He hadn't been keeping the evenings for himself. He'd been keeping them for everyone. For everyone. Night came quietly, though the sky never turned black. It stayed in that half color, the tone of dusk, stretched thin, hovering between now and then. Elias could no longer tell if it was evening or dawn. He didn't mind. The walk home felt softer somehow. The air hummed faintly, and every few steps, the world seemed to blur. One moment, he walked along the present path. The next, he saw its older self, the one from years ago, overgrown with summer flowers, the same ones she used to plant along the edges. When he reached the cottage, the door was already open. A pale light moved inside, steady, calm, the kind of glow that came from the hearth when someone else was home. He stepped in slowly. The scent hit him first, jasmine and smoke. Then the faint clink of a spoon in a cup. He didn't call out. He just stood there, his breath shallow, his hand still on the doorframe. The chair across from his was occupied, not by a figure, not yet, but by the outline of one, shaped in soft light, as if dusk itself had taken form. The air shimmered faintly, bending around where her head would be. Her hands resting lightly on her lap. She wasn't a ghost. Ghosts are sharp and cold. This presence was warm, like the air before rain. He took a step closer, slow, careful, afraid the sight would vanish if he moved too fast. But the light stayed. He sat down in his own chair, the old one by the window. The same two chairs that had always faced each other, even after she was gone. The space between them felt smaller now. He whispered, "You've come back." The air moved just slightly, like a sigh against his cheek. He smiled. It wasn't disbelief. It wasn't fear. Just a quiet recognition. He had felt her returning for weeks, in the sea wind, in the color of the sky, in the hum of the jars. Now she was here, not separated by years or glass. For a long time, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The sound of the sea outside was enough. The fire in the hearth flickered, catching on the edges of the glass jars that lined the walls, each one glowing faintly with the breath of old light. He looked toward the shelves. The jars weren't still anymore. Their light moved, not trapped, but flowing gently, drifting from one to another like threads of color weaving through the air. The house looked alive, not with ghosts, not with memories, but with something more complete. Time had stopped dividing itself. Everything he had ever loved was here now, folded into one endless moment. He turned back to her outline. The air shimmered softly again, and for just a second, the light deepened, forming clearer edges. The curve of her shoulder, the shape of her hands, the faintest trace of her smile. He reached forward, not to touch, but to feel the warmth between them. And in that stillness, he heard her voice, quiet, almost part of the wind. "You kept them safe." He closed his eyes. "I tried. You never had to." He opened his mouth to speak again, but the light flickered, wrapping the room in gold. And for a heartbeat, he was young again, sitting by her side. The sea outside, alive with color. The first jar still open on the table. When he blinked, the cottage returned to its quiet self, but the air still glowed softly beside the chair. She was there, not gone, not waiting, just here. He leaned back, a small smile settling on his face. Outside, the wind carried the sound of waves brushing the shore. And somewhere, far off, the faint hum of other jars, other evenings, answered back. Asterisk in the days that followed. Elias didn't speak much. He didn't need to. The house had begun to breathe with him. The light in the jars no longer slept through the mornings. It drifted quietly around the room, pooling on the floorboards, sliding over the walls, touching the chair beside him as if tracing memory with its own slow rhythm. He would sit for hours watching it move. Sometimes it pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. Sometimes it flickered in rhythm with his breath. Outside, the village had changed. The air shimmered in ways it hadn't before, faintly rippling like heat over sand. Paths curved differently each day, as if they remembered how they used to be and couldn't decide which version to stay with. The bell tower, once leaning slightly, now stood straighter, its old cracks fading in the golden haze. People noticed it too. The cobbler, who lived near the square, said the mornings lasted longer than they should. The baker swore his loaves stayed warm till dusk, and the children, always fearless, began to wander near Elise's door again, curious about the soft light that spilled from beneath it. They said he was painting something new, something big, but he hadn't touched a brush in days. Every night, he'd light one candle and sit near the window. The sea still moved below, silver and soft, and above it, the sky never deepened fully into dark. It stayed caught, like a painting unfinished, but content to remain that way. He had started to forget the order of time. Meals came and went without rhythm. Sleep arrived in short, weightless stretches. He began waking up with faint traces of her humming still in his head, as though she had been there while he slept, still tending to the air, keeping it from falling apart. One afternoon, or maybe it was morning, maybe both, Elias stepped outside and found the light of the sea spreading onto the road, not reflecting, spreading. The surface of the water had grown, still as glass, yet its brightness ran up through the shore, painting the stones pale and cool. He knelt to touch it. It wasn't water. Not exactly. Not light, either. Something between the two. It clung to his fingers, weightless and soft. When he lifted his hand, a thread of that glow stayed suspended in the air. He stared for a long time. Then another thread lifted, and another, until the air itself seemed to hum with motion. The jars inside the house began to flicker faster. One by one, their lids loosened, soundlessly, gently, until light began to slip free, swirling into the open doorway, joining the shimmer outside. Elias didn't panic. He didn't rush to stop it. He simply watched as every jar he'd kept safe for decades, each containing the soft shimmer of an evening. A memory, a small kept piece, opened itself back to the world. The light flowed toward the sea. It gathered above the water, forming a slow-turning veil that mirrored the sky, rippling through its own color. And as he stood there, Elias finally understood. The jars had never been meant to hold anything forever. They had waited for the right dusk, the right silence to return what they carried. He turned toward the cottage, half expecting to find her there, and she was not standing, not separate, but present in the way the light curved through the doorway. "You can rest," she whispered, her voice both near and far. He nodded, not as a man saying goodbye, but as one who finally sees what he's always been part of. The sea's hum deepened, the air brightened, and all at once the light moved through him, not harsh, not blinding, but whole. He felt the years unthread, softly, like the sound of a curtain drawn open. The ache in his bones quieted. The walls of the house seemed to breathe. When the light faded again, the road was empty. The door of the cottage hung open, the air inside still warm. The two chairs facing one another. Only the soft hum of the jars remained, or what was left of them, faint outlines of glass glimmering with dust and silence. And somewhere beyond the shore, where sea met sky, a ripple of gold drifted outward, widening gently, as if the world itself had taken a slow, deep breath. The village didn't notice right away. Elias had always been quiet, half vanished, even when he was there. So when his window stayed dark for a few nights, people just thought he was resting, or away by the cliffs collecting colors again. But the air began to change. It started with a sound. The evenings carried a low, steady hum, not loud, but constant, like the sea breathing a little closer than before. The fishermen heard it first. They said the water no longer moved with the wind, that it pulsed instead, like something alive beneath the surface. And the children, who always played near Elias's garden, began to find small trails of light along the grass, thin, soft streaks that shimmered for a few seconds when touched. They called them sleeping lines. No one knew what they were, but the children whispered that Elias had left them behind so they wouldn't lose their way home at night. Inside the village, time grew unsteady again. Mornings didn't hurry anymore. The sun rose slower, its gold deep and heavy, sliding over the rooftops as if remembering where to fall. Shadows stretched further than they should, curling softly around doors and corners. Never dark, only warm and faintly glowing, and the air, it held a strange peace. People woke easier, spoke slower. The baker said his loaves never burned now, no matter how long he left them. The bell tower's cracks had sealed completely, and when it rang at dusk, the sound rolled through the fields in waves, gentle as a lullaby. Still, someone had to go check on Elias. It was Marta, the widow who'd lived 2 houses down from him for 40 years. She'd brought him bread every week, even when he forgot to eat it. She knocked on his door one evening, holding a small lantern. The door opened easily. The inside smelled faintly of rain and paint and old wood warmed by sun. She stepped in slowly. The jars were gone. Only faint circles of dust marked where they'd been. But the air shimmered very softly, like the afterglow of something that had just finished becoming itself. Marta stood there for a while, not sure why her eyes had filled. She sat on his chair, hands resting on her lap, and whispered, "You finally left, didn't you?" And then she noticed it. On the small table near the window, there was one jar still standing. The lid was loose. Inside, a dim light rested quietly, barely moving. She lifted it carefully. It felt warm, not hot, more like a living pulse, something gentle, and beneath the light, written on a torn scrap of paper, was a line in Elias's hand. "If you ever forget where the evenings go, just listen." She didn't understand at first, but when she stepped outside, she did. The whole village was listening. The hum was everywhere, underfoot, in the trees, in the slow roll of the sea. It wasn't music, not really, just a rhythm, steady, patient, alive. The villagers didn't speak of it much. They didn't call it magic or miracle. They just began to live differently, slower, gentler. Doors stayed open longer in the evenings. People left bread out for strangers passing through. And when night came, they'd all sit for a while by the shore, watching the faint threads of light shimmer on the tide dot. No one ever saw Elias again, but sometimes when the sea was still enough, you could see his reflection between the ripples, not as a man standing apart, but as light moving with the water. The world had folded him in, and in the hush that lingered after, the village learned how to breathe the way he had, quietly, fully, and without hurry. Years passed, though no one kept count anymore. The seasons softened into one another until they were more suggestion than measure. The air simply changed its tone, its scent, its warmth. The villagers grew used to it. No one spoke much of time now. They just said, "The light has turned a little colder," or "the evenings are breathing slower." The sea stayed calm. Its color deepened into something not quite blue, not quite silver. When it moved, it did so without urgency, a slow, endless motion that carried no beginning or end. And sometimes, when it was still enough, the surface would mirror the sky so perfectly that it became impossible to tell which way was up. The children who had once chased the sleeping vines had grown older. They remembered Elias only as a story their parents whispered at dusk, the painter who caught light in jars, the man who never hurried. They told his story softly, as if afraid to wake something ancient and kind that still lingered in the air. The cottage by the shore still stood. Its walls were pale now, touched by salt and time, but it hadn't fallen. The door remained open. Sometimes travelers passing through the hills found it by accident. They'd step inside, feel the hush, and leave again without quite knowing why their hearts felt steadier afterward. One spring evening, a young girl, the baker's granddaughter, found the last jar. It sat half buried near the garden under the roots of an old fig tree. Inside, the faintest glow still lived, dim but patient. She carried it carefully to the sea and sat with it in her lap. When she unscrewed the lid, nothing happened at first. Just a sigh, not from the wind, but from the air itself, as if the world had been waiting for her. Then the light slipped out. It didn't rise or fade. It simply spread thin, gentle, golden, like warmth spilling across the shore. The sea caught it, held it, and for a few moments, everything looked the way it might have long ago. The hills soft with mist, the village calm, the horizon folding into quiet. The girl smiled without knowing why. She didn't think of Elias, or of stories, or even of time. She just watched the sea breathing, slow and sure, the way one might watch someone sleeping. By morning, the light was gone, but something had changed. Not the place exactly, but the way it felt. The village no longer seemed to wait for anything. It had found its rhythm, that slow, unbroken hum that lived beneath sound, a peace that didn't depend on endings. And when night came again, the stars shone lower than before, soft and near, as if leaning closer to listen. Some said they could still hear him, Elias, in the air, in the pause between waves, in the hush before dawn. But no one searched for him. He wasn't gone, not really. He was everywhere the world remembered to breathe. The light he'd released, the evenings he'd kept, had folded back into the earth, the sea, the people. And so the village kept living, slowly, kindly, endlessly. A place that never rushed toward tomorrow. A place that, perhaps, forgot how to end. How to end.